Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Asset Protection Planning, Reducing the Financial Stress on the Working Caregiver. As many of you know, Genzer Dubau, Genzer & Kona offers an employee benefit program called TAWC, Tools and Advice for Working Caregivers. The purpose of TAWC is designed to help working caregivers navigate the elder care landscape while remaining present and productive at work. Studies show that giving employees the tools they need to help care for their aging loved ones reduces absenteeism, reduces downtime, reduces turnover, and promotes job security for the working elder caregiver. In this webinar, our goal is to teach you a bit about asset protection planning and how it can soften the blow on the caregiver, on the working caregiver, and ease their burden a bit from a financial perspective, making sure that they have the assets available to help take care of their loved one, which will in turn hopefully reduce some of the caregiver stress. So with us today we have Marcus Otugello from our office. He is a senior associate here at Genzer Dubau, Genzer & Kona, and he is going to talk to you a little bit more about elder law asset protection planning. Marcus?
Thanks, Melissa. Again, I'm Marcus O'Toole, and what we're going to be talking today is about asset protection for long-term medical expenses. If an employee's loved one is ill and needs care, what their insurance doesn't cover, and how government benefits are available with proper planning. Right? So I think that one of the most basic concepts in asset protection is planning ahead. And in the world we're talking about today, the key number is 5 years. Okay? And by planning ahead, they can maximize the protection of their assets, make sure that everything that the caregiver and their family have built up over a number of years is not depleted and placing a financial stress on the family as a whole. So when we're talking about asset protection today, we're mainly talking about Medicaid. And a little bit of a background here on the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. Similar sounding names, very different in function and what they cover. So for an elder person, they are entitled to Medicare when they turn 65, and it covers most of your basic health care coverage that a normal employer-provided plan would cover, like doctor's visits, prescriptions, surgeries, hospital visits. Something that does not cover is long-term home health care aides or a nursing home beyond a short rehab period. And those kinds of expenses can be very high and extend over a long period of time. And Medicare just doesn't cover them. And as an example of the numbers we're talking about, that a good nursing home on Long Island could run something like $15,000 a month. And even home health care aides can be several $1,000s a month depending on how much care they need. So there's a real concern with any working caregiver that the parent's assets will be rapidly depleted. They don't know where the next payment is coming from, and they're not aware of the ability they have to use government benefits to help protect what's built up and make sure that the care that their family member and the loved one needs is being paid for. So in the Medicaid world, and back to the planning ahead, there's a 5-year look-back period for transfers for nursing home Medicaid. So again, that's the key time period and why they need to plan ahead of time. So when we're talking about asset protection planning, we use trusts. And a trust is basically a vehicle to hold assets on behalf of the creator, and that a trustee that the creator names, so mom or dad could name their children, a brother or a sister, but not themselves, would manage the assets on behalf of the creator as a way so that the assets in the trust are not counted as assets for Medicaid qualification. Someone who's going to apply for Medicaid needs to have less than $14,850 in their name. So doing a trust 5 years in advance helps get it out of their name for Medicaid purposes, and it makes it so government benefits are available to pay for their care and avoid having to spend everything. So when we set up the trust and we name a child or whomever as the trustee, most people place into the trust a family home and maybe some cash or other liquid assets that are otherwise counted as Medicaid assets. Assets that are not counted as Medicaid assets generally would be 401ks and IRAs, qualified annuities, and other retirement assets. Those wouldn't go into a trust, but everything else we usually recommend that they transfer most of their substantial assets to the trust. If they contribute assets to the trust that generate income, they still get to keep the income. The income can be paid to them. That's the concern for a lot of our clients is, they transfer everything to a trust, but they're living off the income, and the caregiver is going to need that income to pay bills and things. So the trust provides that they get to retain the income. However, the creator of the trust cannot go and take principal out. They can't just walk to the bank and say, give me $50,000 from this trust. If we made it so they could do that, then it doesn't qualify to protect their assets for Medicaid purposes because they would have ready access to it. However, as a way out the side door, so to speak, the trustees can distribute money to children or other named beneficiaries during their lifetime, and then those children or beneficiaries can then write a check to, for medical care or to fix the roof or whatever they need to do. So it's not locked away. It's made to be as flexible as it can, but not so flexible as to make it not qualify for Medicaid purposes. So that talks about what happens with the trust, say if it had cash assets or anything else during their life. Well, what happens when the creator passes away? Well, the trust generally provides, at least the way we do it, that the creator can specify in their will what happens to their assets that are in the trust. So just because they place assets into the trust does not mean they're locked into a distribution scheme if they change their mind, if, between the different children, adding grandchildren, whatever they want. So it's meant to be flexible so they could change their mind later, and it would go with however else their estate is distributed in their will. And if they're including grandchildren or other minors, just like in a will in general, it can be held for them by other relatives as in a different type of trust to protect them until they get older. So it's made to be flexible when it comes to what happens to the assets when they pass away, and not just locked into whatever we initially said in the trust. When a lot of people come to us and talk about asset protection, they say, okay, I need to do planning 5 years in advance. The trust, I don't know, that sounds like a lot of money. Can't I just give it to my children? Well, for several reasons, that's not a good idea. First is, if you put it into if you just give it to your children or to whomever, the parent no longer has control over that asset. So if it's a house, legally speaking, they could evict the parent. They could be exposing it to their children's creditors. Suppose they had tax problems or something, and the IRS slaps a lien on the parent's house, and nobody's going to want that. And another big problem with just giving it to the children has to do with taxes. So when someone inherits property from a parent through a trust or just through a will, and then they go sell the property after death, they don't have to pay capital gains taxes. However, if you just gave the asset to the child and it was in their name when the parent passed away, then there could be a substantial capital gains tax burden when they sell the property. And this being Long Island and the way real estate prices are compared to when a lot of people bought their properties 40 years ago, that tax burden can be very substantial. So by doing it in a trust, instead of just giving it to them, they save on those capital gains, among the other things we just talked about. So talking about the home, which, you know, in most Long Island middle-class families that are considering asset protection, the home is going to be their largest single asset. You know, again, they bought it 40 years ago for $20,000, and now it's worth $400,000, and they want to protect it so it's not depleted and sold to pay for their medical expenses. Maybe their working caregiver is living with them and needs it, and they want to preserve it for their heirs. That's usually the largest thing that we're talking about protecting. So the benefit of using a trust is that the person, the creator, is going to retain the right to live in the house for as long as they want. The children can't kick them out, can't sell it without their consent. They get to live in it as long as they want. If they do want to buy something else, they can. The trust can sell the property, the cash stays in the trust, and they can use it to buy something else that the parents can live in, maybe downsize or move to Florida or what have you. The other benefit of using the trust for the house, again, comes back to taxes, specifically real estate taxes. By using the trust, you're keeping the STAR exemption, and on their income tax return, they could still deduct their real estate taxes. There's no, you know, they don't lose that right. And if they were to sell the house in the trust, they're entitled to their own personal capital gains tax exclusion. So, you know, bottom line is, for tax purposes, a trust is almost always going to be more beneficial to just giving it to the children. And also, just because you're putting it into a trust doesn't mean that the creator loses the tax benefits of home ownership in general, in addition to accomplishing their asset protection goals. So I think the bottom line is that when we're talking about whether it's home care or a nursing home, we're talking about a substantial amount of cost to providing long-term medical expenses. Come back to the $15,000 a month for a nursing home. So it's a substantial amount of money, and something that the caregiver should really consider talking with their parent about protecting the assets ahead of time and having the peace of mind that government benefits will be available to help with care at some point in the future. And then they're not going to have to be so desperate to sell the house, or the caregiver spends their own money, or, you know, because they're not sure, the home health care aides are costing so much, they're cutting down on hours to save money, and then they're taking off work. So I think that in the instance when you're concerned that at some point in the future there would be substantial long-term medical expenses, whereas, you know, to be honest with you, it could happen to anyone. It could be in the greatest of health. Somebody has a fall, somebody has an accident, dementia, it could happen to anyone. And I think that the greatest thing that we can provide is not just protecting the assets, it's providing peace of mind that, yes, the assets are going to be available for whatever they need it for. They're not going to have to spend everything on their care. You know, benefits are available to pay for aides for a nursing home. You're not going to have to take off, you know, run from work down to the house to, you know, clean up something. But the important thing is they need to do it ahead of time because of the rules. The maximize, you know, if you want to maximize protection, they need to do it at least 5 years in advance. Not to say all is lost if you haven't done it that far in advance, but I think that's the key number here. And there's a lot of things we can do to help people out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Excuse me one second, we're having technical difficulties. Okay, so as Marcus discussed, planning ahead is a huge component in making sure that your elder caregivers are prepared and that they're not going to have to be taking a lot of time off from work or spending a lot of time at work dealing with these types of issues. Planning ahead, making sure the money's available, either available for the care or making sure that the money is protected so that government benefits can help pay for the care is huge. In addition to educating the working elder caregivers and teaching them how to navigate the landscape, the employers should encourage their workforce to plan ahead for themselves as well. So when we meet with clients who are working caregivers, we'll also talk to them about doing their own planning and making sure that they have their own power of attorney, their own healthcare proxy, perhaps their own asset protection plan in place, depending on their age. Maybe they need a trust as well, or perhaps they need to do some tax planning. But planning ahead really takes the guesswork out of dealing with a crisis, and that's what we're looking to do when we're looking to help working caregivers, because their crisis then becomes your crisis as a business owner. As a reminder, over 65 million Americans, 29% of all U.S. households, provide care for an adult family member, and these numbers are only going to grow going forward. So arm your workforce with information they need now to avoid a crisis later, and give us a call and we can talk about our program. Thank you very much. See you next time.